The Unsettling Dormitory. Chapter 1. The Whispering Walls. I stood before the old brick building, clutching my suitcase and gazing up at its imposing structure as the setting sun cast long shadows across the deserted campus grounds. As I finally took a deep breath and pushed through the rusted front door, an eerie feeling washed over me. An inexplicable sense of being watched by unseen eyes that lingered in every corner, under every window pane. The musty air enveloped my lungs as I stepped into the dimly lit hallway. My name was called out from a distant voice. Emily. It was Sarah, my roommate, B.E., standing at the end of the corridor, her dark hair swaying with each step towards me. With hesitant relief, I made my way over, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that lingered within these ancient walls. Sarah smiled warmly as we exchanged awkward pleasantries and began unpacking our belongings in a room adorned with faded wallpaper and worn-out furniture. As I settled into my new space, my eyes roamed the simple wooden desk, creaky bed frame, and an antique wardrobe that seemed to have witnessed decades of secrets. Sarah's chatter about various dorm amenities faded into background noise as my gaze drifted to the window. The one I chose had a peculiar view, an abandoned courtyard hidden from the rest of campus life. Shadows danced along its stone walls like restless spirits. The building had aged gracefully, perhaps even majestically if it weren't for whispers that lingered in every corner. This place was haunted by an unseen presence. Sarah noticed my concern and leaned in close. "You don't have to worry about the stories," she said reassuringly. "It's just old legends passed down from freshman to freshman." Yet, I couldn't shake off the notion that there was more. As night approached, a strange silence fell over our dorm room. It wasn't until then that I realized how isolated we truly were, tucked away in an outdated wing of the sprawling institution. The only sound was my own heart pounding against my ribcage. As darkness fell, shadows began to flicker along the walls, and I became convinced I could hear muffled whispers when there was no one around. "Sarah?" My voice rang out into the hollow space, but she slept peacefully in her bed, oblivious to whatever force was awakening around us. In my drowsiness, I drifted between reality and nightmares, waking to find objects misplaced or moved from their original places. Then I heard a soft, mournful weeping. The sound echoed outside our room, reverberating through the empty corridors like an ethereal lament. I clutched my blanket tight, but it only brought me respite for brief moments as those whispers returned, closer now, a chilling Emily. The night wore on with no reprieve. A sudden jolt awakened Sarah beside me. "Do you hear that?" she whispered urgently, eyes wide in the moonlight that sliced through her curtains. I nodded, and together we crept out of bed to investigate. The whispers grew louder, drawing us to a door at the far end of the hall, shrouded by darkness. My heart hammered as Sarah pushed it open with caution. In this isolated wing, an eerie void greeted us where several rooms had once been converted into storage spaces. I stepped forward, and my sneaker hit something hard on the floor. A photograph lay face down on a wooden crate, faded but unmistakable, depicting students from the 1950s, their faces distorted with fear in the midst of some unseen horror. Sarah grabbed it, brushing off her hands in disgust. "This is creepy." Her words were hardly audible over my racing heart. There was something else, too. A faint scent of aged smoke and decay clung to those long-gone faces, hauntingly familiar, like the acrid smell of a distant memory that lingered on my clothes from childhood. I reached for it before she could toss it back onto the crate. As my fingers grazed the paper, the image began to burn in front of our eyes, a surreal blaze engulfing the students with an otherworldly light. Sarah yanked me away, but not before I had time to see faces contort into twisted visages, their mouths stretched into grotesque grimaces as if screaming silently. The image crumbled beneath our feet amidst an intense heat that left behind smoldering remains. A charred photograph. Sarah pulled me back to our room, the door slamming shut behind us. "You should probably keep this under wraps," she murmured, handing over the remnants of what was once someone else's history. I felt a chill, as if unseen eyes watched us both from the shadows. In the darkness, Sarah whispered an unspoken truth. They said room 314 had seen it all. Unsolved murders, disappearances, and a tragic fire that scarred this very building. The whispers returned to their normal hush by morning light, but the photograph's aftermath lingered in my mind. As we settled into our routine, I couldn't help but wonder if it was more than just an urban legend. A week passed without incident. Academic routines and campus life consumed us. That is until classes ended on a Tuesday, leaving us alone once again. The door creaked open with an unrecognizable slowness as Sarah entered, her eyes wide with worry. "I found this in our mailbox," she said nervously, offering a black dot and a white photograph. A picture of myself taken decades ago from the same angle I'd shot through my window that morning, standing amidst the courtyard shadows, lost and pale. In the frame was an envelope with a single word scrawled on it: Emily. A shiver coursed down my spine as I recognized my own name in those long dead letters. A chill of dread permeated every corner of room 314, as if unseen hands had orchestrated this mysterious delivery. Sarah insisted we leave immediately, but the photograph beckoned. An inexplicable pull drew me to the courtyard. Shadows lengthened like tentacles stretching out from the building's depths, ensnaring me with a malevolent allure. As I descended those wooden stairs, the floorboards groaned, as if listening for my response. Outside, the sky was blood-red during dusk, an omen perhaps, or a trick of the fading light. The courtyard seemed smaller up close, and within its stone confines stood an old oak tree, branches grasping like skeletal fingers towards me. I felt the weight of history, ancient and malevolent, as if it held secrets waiting to be unearthed. A sudden gust slapped my face with cold wind, carrying a whispered phrase. "Get out." My skin prickled. Unfamiliar voices drifted from all sides. "Run," they hissed in unison. The oak tree loomed overhead, branches quivering ominously. As I spun to flee back up the stairs, a figure materialized at the edge of my vision, draped in tattered robes that seemed to billow with an otherworldly force. Ethereal wisps that caressed her face before dissipating into thin air. Sarah's cries were drowned out by an inexplicable gust as I was swept towards the courtyard. In the midst of chaos, a door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped, sealed in this haunted corner of time. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Photograph. I stumbled through the darkness, my hand reaching blindly for the oak tree trunk as icy fingers brushed against my arm. From afar, Sarah's muffled voice pleaded with me to run, but faded away before I could take a step further. The courtyard felt like a stage set by malevolent hands, an invitation to something sinister that lay in wait beyond the crumbling structure of this old building. In my disorientation, I collided with wood and found it warm beneath my fingers. Not just any wood, but an entry point from another time, the door now gone as suddenly as it had appeared. Crouched beneath its archway, I felt a presence coalescing around me. The very air thickened. The photograph, clutched in my hand, began to burn with an unearthly light. Sarah's desperate yells and pounding from outside only fueled that primal horror within my chest as the oak seemed to writhe behind me. A gust of unseasoned winter rushed forth, carrying a single word etched into its heart. Eve. The photograph disintegrated in flames, searing itself onto my palm before crumbling to ash, leaving a blistering mark in its wake. In that timeless space, I knew the truth. An evil was awakening. Flickering light illuminated the courtyard as Eve materialized, a woman shrouded by robes, face obscured by nightmarish shadows. A nameless terror gripped me, and then she spoke through lips twisted into agony. "You're mine now." As darkness swallowed her back, I realized with stark clarity we were not alone in this place. We never had been. The door to room 314 was gone. All that remained was a gaping maw where it once stood. Sarah pounded futilely on the ancient oak tree, begging me for help. I retreated towards her cries, but something caught my hand. Icy fingers as cold as frost wrapped around mine before pulling me into their abyss. Eve's laughter echoed and faded as we were plunged into the heart of that courtyard. Outside, Sarah turned frantic, blood trickling from her mouth after a single, guttural scream echoed out into history. Eve materialized once more, robe edges dancing in an ethereal wind that tugged at me relentlessly. The oak door reappeared. She reached for it, and I followed. A willing offering. With the photograph's secrets in hand, Eve led us through twisted corridors to our room. My reflection stared back from the window glass, a ghostly apparition with smudged eyeliner tracing her features. An echo of a woman lost to time. Sarah stumbled upon me, slumped against my desk. "Eve," she managed before blood trickled down her chin and throat in stark contrast to the photograph I now held. The same image Eve wore as a dormant, black, twisted lips painted crimson red on that long, forgotten face. Our eyes met with an unspoken understanding. We'd both fallen under some sinister allure, ensnared by the very history this house kept. It was then the portrait began to change in front of us. A visage not my own, but one I recognized. Eve's. The painting began to smoke and peel away, revealing my reflection, an undeniable part of her. My mind reeled as Eve turned, and our eyes locked. Chapter 3. The Final Goodbye. Sarah was never seen again or heard from after that day. I woke to find myself bound to a wooden chair in this room, shackled with an unspoken dread that wrapped around my wrists like Eve's ethereal wind. A mirror reflected the courtyard, but instead of shadows, it showed the smoldering remains of photographs. The woman before me wore the black lips and crimson eyeliner as her own. "You cannot leave." Those twisted words echoed in the room's emptiness. In that moment, time blurred. A silent scream tore through my soul as Eve's gaze lured me into the abyss with promises of knowledge I could barely comprehend. I saw them. Countless souls bound to this place by an unseen force. Their faces contorted in agony, their screams muffled and distant, as if from another room altogether. The mirror shattered, showering us in shards that reformed to form Eve's twisted visage before she turned and fled into the light. In her wake, Sarah huddled on a bed, eyes red rimmed with unshed tears. I become Eve. Her name echoed through my mind like a whispered truth long forgotten. There were others here, but we never spoke of it aloud. Each night, they visited me as I slept, their faces contorted in agony, pleading silently within the darkness. Eve, their cries formed an unspoken plea that pierced this desolate space and seeped into my dreams. The courtyard shadows birthed a girl with black lips and crimson red eyes. Myself, Eve, trapped for decades, had become me. The portrait hung over her bed, an eerie smile etched into the frame like something forged from smoke and human fear. My reflection, her heartbeats echoing through our minds in a cacophony that echoed within my head. Eve's spirit merged with mine, they were now one. And every morning after, Sarah vanished, only to return later, haunted by some unseen force, as if she'd crossed over into the abyss once shared between us. A silent scream echoed through our room, reverberating off the walls until I woke. Every night it grew louder and more insistent, like Eve's eternal cry for help. There was an understanding there were others, women who never escaped. I awoke to find myself faceless, lips black as coal, with crimson eyes that reflected what she'd been given. The courtyard stretched outside our window, a silent sentinel of secrets left behind by those who bore witness to unimaginable horrors. We had become Eve, and if I thought it ended there, Eve became me once more. A child was born, an innocent, screaming from the abyss. In this place of shadows and ancient fears, some things were passed down through time and bloodlines. They came at night, countless, their faces twisted in silent screams, pleading for help that only echoed within dreams. Eve's face on the portrait changed to Sarah's once more before I vanished into the abyss, a woman with crimson lips and black eyeliner staring back from those haunting windows. Eve screamed silently every morning. In darkness, she whispered my name like a prayer. As the world outside grew silent, they'd passed it down through us now. She wept for what lay ahead, our daughter's fate. Every night, I relived their collective anguish until I was nothing but an empty shell of madness and sorrow. A shadow that echoed Eve, bound to this abyss, forever lost in time. In the mirror, there was only blood smeared across its surface. It was my own legacy now, painted crimson for those who followed in our footsteps, women like us, bearing witness to the horrors of their own lives. And so they came to me at night, faces twisted and agonized, pleading silently through dreams that echoed with Eve's eternal scream. I became another faceless Eve, trapped by an unseen force, reliving the anguish of others before me. They bore down on our child, countless, screaming in torment while Eve wept above them all, a silent reminder that some things were passed down through bloodlines and time.